Welcome, Jim, to the Canadian Wealth Secrets podcast. We're excited to have you here today to kind of get into your brain and your mind and get some thoughts out to the audience. Do us a favor, though, before we kind of roll into it. Let us know, where you're coming from, and then also maybe just give us a little bit of insight into what, unique ability you bring to the entrepreneurial business, wealth creation space.
Well, thank you for having me, John, Kyle. My name is Jim. I was born and raised in Toronto, Canada. First generation to immigrant parents. They came here in the 60s. I was raised in the 70s. And as I was growing up, I started investing or learning about investing through the usual channels, or maybe not so usual because a lot of people are still sort of not doing it. But I followed the Peter Lynch, Warren Buffett, Ben Graham, path, and started investing in U.S. stocks and U.S. real estate. And after that, I basically got onto social media, and now I have 5 million views on TikTok a month, as well as 5 million views on Instagram a month. And I just got onto X, but I haven't cracked that code, formerly known as Twitter. And so I'm just sort of sharing what I've done over the last 30 plus years, investing in stocks and real estate, but with a U.S. focus. Okay. And that's unusual, I guess, for most people because I speak to Canadians, but all my investments are in America.
I so appreciate that. And for anyone who's wondering and they're going, wait a second, have I seen this person on TikTok or, Facebook, Instagram, wherever you're at? It is the Lazy Canadian Investor. I love that title. That's what intrigued me when I kind of stumbled upon your profile, gave it a click. Because John and I speak to Canadians as well. And I think there's a lot of similarities in the messaging that you have. And there's also some differences. I would argue it might be maybe blind spots on our part, or maybe just areas we haven't explored yet. But the part about the US piece, I think there's definitely a clear connection there. I had seen a post, you were talking about US real estate, you were talking about the US markets. And, just to give you a little background back when I was teaching, my former, world of teaching, I started investing in the US back in around 2011. I think the difference, though, there's a big difference there, is it sounds like you were smart enough to go heavy at the time, whereas I kind of dipped my toes in. It was my first investment property I bought. And I also bought with this thought in my mind, like I'm a very, at the time I'm still this way, but at the time I was like very safe. I had my little pension, a great pension that we were working towards, but I wanted more. And my parents were like, don't invest in real estate. This is crazy. So then I did all this research. It took me from probably 2006 to 2011 to finally pull the trigger. And I bought a property, and I made sure, could we use this as a vacation home in case this doesn't work out? Like, everyone's always fearful, like, will I ever be able to rent this thing? What if no one wants to live there? All of those things went through my mind. Picked up a place in Florida, picked up a place in Arizona the year later, but then sort of like pumped the brakes and, wanted to see, like, is this going to work? And obviously after the fact went, boy, I missed a chance of an opportunity to really go hard at that time. So I want to hear your angle. I know that you did some investing back then. You were doing US stocks, from what I recall, in, back around that 2008, scenario, and you took advantage of US real estate. Take us back and tell us that time in your life. Where were you? Were you already did you feel financially secure at the time, or did you just know, like, this is going to be the opportunity of a lifetime and I got to jump on it?
Those are a lot of good questions there, Kyle. So I'll go back to, that was just sort of a symptom of everything that happened to me in the 70s and 80s. I was very influenced by my parents and my teachers. So teachers had a huge impact on me because that was the metric by way I got approval from my parents, right? So if my teachers liked me because I did well in their courses, my parents would appreciate me. So that was sort of probably an insecurity that I had as a child. So when my parents wanted me to study hard, and it was always studying hard for the same courses, it was like the physics, the chemistry, the math courses. And back
Go
then,
math.
I don't know if they have it now, courses were split into advanced and general. Like they streamed you into advanced. I don't even remember how they decided. I think you just pick. Like
You
you
decide.
just
Yeah,
decided,
you
to
decided.
suffer. You just decided you wanted to suffer.
You picked.
So,
Yes.
so my parents decided that I should suffer on the advanced track. And I would be like one of those people that, back then we had textbooks, and I wouldn't be prompted by the teachers. Who'd just be like, they would have the example, they would have questions, and in the back of the book, they would have the answers. And so basically, I just kept drilling. Like I was just drilling constantly. So every class I was like prepared. I'd be like the 10% that John talks about, who's like, what about this? And what about that? And like, how do you do it if this is missing or that's missing? Right. So I'd be like, because I wanted to be fully covered for any test or any quiz or anything like that, so that I could get the marks I needed and get the approval from my parents.
Right.
So that's
what did your teachers say? We got to know this as former math teachers. We want to know, like, what was the answer that the teachers gave you when you were like, why does that happen? Like, was it positive, or was it like, just like, do the work, kid?
I had a teacher that looked very similar to actually to John, like, and very like, I guess that was what colored what a math teacher should look like.
Yeah.
So I guess, so he was very into math. Like he just loved math, and he would be happy to talk about these problems and go over these type of things with me and sort of help me understand things. And I also had my dad, who was an engineer, who also helped me walk through things. And he was more than happy to give me extra assignments. Unfortunately,
I gotta say, Jim, like what you just described is not someone who's lazy. Like you just said, hey, back then I worked hard, I flipped through things, I got this done. Like when we, as high school teachers, when we saw students who are going above and beyond, we wouldn't classify them as lazy, but you're calling yourself the lazy investor, the Canadian, lazy Canadian investor. So give me an insight here. Like, you're clearly not lazy. Is it like you're trying to think more passive? Is that where this kind of name comes from, on your philosophy towards, creating your own wealth? Like give the audience a little snippet of like where this lazy comes from and how it relates to your strategies.
That's a perfect segue, because I got so burnt out trying to get higher and higher marks. Like my parents were not satisfied unless it was 100% perfect score.
Right.
So even though I think in high school, my average out of all my courses was like 94%, they were like, why isn't it 100?
Right.
And so eventually, when I was 15 years old, I said, why are we playing this game? Because it resets every semester. Every semester it resets. And I have to keep doing this over and over again. Like, what's this for? And they explained that traditional path where you do very well in high school, you get the university of your choice and the profession of your choice, and then you work for Fortune 500, and then after you do that and you do the same thing in the Fortune 500, you get a lot of money.
Right.
So at 15, I said, why don't we just skip to the money? Like this is like I mean, this was a 10-year plan.
He's not the lazy Canadian investor. He's the smart Canadian investor. He's like, let's just skip all the stuff and get to the fun.
Yeah, why don't we just get to the money part? And my parents, either they didn't want to discourage me, or they didn't know, too embarrassed to say. They just said, it doesn't work that way. Like life doesn't work that way. And you need to follow what we're telling you, because we've been through this, and just trust us. Right. Yeah. And I had my first job at St. Hubert's. I don't know if you guys had that, but I was at St. Hubert's, rotisserie chicken. I was making $4.25 an hour. Love that place.
We're like a Swiss chalet area, like there's no St. Hubert's here.
I don't think there's there.
You gotta be farther east. Yeah, you gotta be farther east.
John's a Kingston guy, so he's all over it.
Yeah. So I was working there. I'm making $4 an hour, and you never talk back to your parents, right? Especially if they're from the old country and they're from the 60s, right? Unless you want to be, physically harmed. So anyway, I basically was doing dishes at $4 an hour. I was thinking they're wrong. They have to be wrong. They might be my parents, but I am pretty sure they're wrong for 3 reasons. And this was my reason. I said, I don't think millionaires are working millions of hours, because that's how many hours I'd have to work at $4 an hour to make $1 million. There's no way you can work 1,000,000 hours, you know? And then number two, I was thinking the path that they're telling me, like if I look around my classroom, if I look at my teachers, if I look at my relatives, if I look at my parents, they all followed that path, like they said, but they're not rich. Like they're
Why?
still working. Like
Love
I'm
it.
pretty sure that the people I'm reading in the newspaper who are wealthy, like, you know, in the financial section, they're not doing this.
They didn't do it that way.
I don't think that, like, there's something missing. And the third thing I was thinking, like, I'm new on this planet. I've only been alive for about, 15 years. But, from history, I could tell that man's been around for like, whatever, 200,000 years. Someone along this long history must have figured out the shortcut. They must have figured it out, and they probably wrote it down somewhere. They probably wrote it. So the answer I am looking for must be in the library. It must be there. That it's in the library, or it's at Cole's Notes, in the bookstore. Like it's going to be in one of those two places.
Yeah,
because it definitely is not in
Did
school.
you find it?
Because I read all those books, right? And as I started learning, the first books I read were by Peter Lynch, and then Robert Hagstrom, Warren Buffett, Ben Graham, et cetera, et cetera. I was thinking, this path, I don't know why everyone believes it, but it's not right. It is so wrong. Like none of these investors talk about the path that my parents described.
Right.
And then my marks started falling because everything I studied in school, I was thinking, this is a waste of my time. This is a waste of my time. This is a waste of my time. And then my marks started dropping, still high enough to get into engineering at the University of Toronto, but they kept dropping until I failed second year. I just failed because on second year university, I did nothing because every textbook was like heavy statistics, heavy calculus, heavy physics. I was like, this has nothing to do with how comfortable my life will be. Like nothing. And then once I failed out, my parents were devastated. So I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do as a compromise. I'm going to keep learning what I'm learning, which will actually help me live a really good life. And I'll just do the bare minimum, hit that 75% average, and just get my engineering degree so you're happy. And then I became super lazy after that because I realized that all these investors, they didn't work really hard. They didn't grind. I mean, they could. They had that choice, but they didn't have to. They didn't grind like 40, 50, 60, 80 hours a week. All of them, they have their little tweaks in terms of how they did it. They all piggybacked off business, either starting one, buying one, investing in one. It was all business. It was all a business that they piggybacked off of to become free. And that's when I became super lazy. And I said, okay, I'm going to put my twist on it. If I invest, buy, or get involved with the business, it needs to be like where I don't have to work. Like I don't want to do the business. I just want to profit from it. Right. So that's where the lazy came from.
I love it. Honestly, I feel like I had mentioned this. I can't remember if we hit record yet or not when I said this, but I said I saw a lot of parallels, and we have that in common too. We both failed in second year university, which is great. Wow. I was in math, and I wouldn't say it was for maybe the same reason. What I want to say, I want to go all the way back to the three things that you sort of like recognized as a 15-year-old. Like that is incredibly reflective to be 15 and to have reflected on those three things. I'm pretty sure I had similar reflections like when I was like 35, like when I was finally like, okay, I was on this path, but I didn't know for certain. And it seems like, when I really look at it and we go under the hood, something that is really, I think, in your definition of lazy, whether maybe you recognize it or not, of course, I'm sure, the terminology is to kind of get people's attention. But the reality is there's certain things that, are worth working really hard for. And then there's other things that maybe aren't. So like a realization that it sounds like you figured out along the way was like, okay, like it might make sense to just get the degree and get whatever job you need to in order to get you closer to this path, the Ben Graham, the Warren Buffetts, the Charlie Mungers, the whoever's, where you're able to have enough income to start that work, or to create enough maybe time in order to decide, like, what are you going to do in the business space? Like, what popped into my mind as you described that around all of these successful people, all of the wealthy, is that they didn't do it from being a dishwasher at Roadkill Cafe, like I started off with, or at Saint Hubert's en Français in Quebec, or working at, let's say a teacher's job, right? Without doing a lot of intentional planning and investing. It all came from business, and reminds me of the cash flow quadrant, which, is, I think, is that a Kiyosaki book where it talks about the 4 quadrants and trying to get from employee all the way to investor, business owner, like that side of the quadrant. And there's so many good nuggets that you shared here. I'm wondering, for those people, like, I want to say one more thing before I ask you this question. When I think about it as an educator, as a former educator, as someone who is, working with students, and I think teachers, it's hard because teachers want what's best for kids, but they're all on the path you described. They're all on that traditional path. And I would also argue there's a caveat here. So I'm going to apologize to any teachers who might be listening, because, hey, we're still, we still love you all. But the reality is that most teachers, we earn here in Ontario, teachers earn a significant salary with one of the best pensions in the world, which means that you don't have to really do any thinking about investing or about this other path. Like, you'll be okay. You'll do your thing, you'll do your 30 years, and you'll be able to retire and probably live like a decent lifestyle. Maybe not if you're living in Toronto and own, a $2 million house. We can get into that later. But you're now educating the youth as to what the path is. And what I'm kind of recognizing is that can't be good for kids, right? Because not every 15-year-old is going to be as reflective as you were to go, there's something about this that might not make any sense here. So I'm wondering, once you came out of university, I think you went into corporate, right? You did do some of that work. Was that against your will? Was that like always sort of a temporary plan? What was your maybe goal there? And, how were you going to get from, if you were already kind of going down that path as a compromise, what was your plan to sort of get to this path over here? Was it business? Did you open businesses? I'd love to hear more about that.
That's a fantastic question. So I realized I became lazy because I realized 99% of the work that I was being asked to do by educators and university and so on were just not necessary. It just wasn't necessary for what I wanted, right? I didn't want to be a doctor or lawyer. I just wanted to be rich. I was like, that sounds like a very difficult way to make money compared to what Warren Buffett's doing, where he's staying at home all day and he says his calendar is empty. And I'm like, that's what I want. I want the money with the empty calendar. And then, so after I graduated, I still didn't want to work. So that was in the mid 90s, like 95. And I said, to avoid working, let's start a business. So I roped in 3 of my engineering friends. One of them was really keen on the business. The other 2 were like, I want to go to corporate, but I was just like, come on, just give it a shot. We're just kids. I mean, what could go wrong? So what? You burn a couple of years of your life. We're in our 20s. Let's go start a business. So they're like, I don't know what to start. And back then the internet was new. I don't know if you remember, but it's CompuServe, AOL Online, floppy disks and all that stuff, right?
The good old days.
300 baud modems.
Yeah.
300 baud modems and stuff like that. So I said, let's start a business. And we started playing around with ideas where it's like, we're going to provide internet services like an ISP. We're going to do this or that. We didn't know. So my friend, who was Steve, who's very interested in business as well, we were always talking about money and investing. So I guess sort of like you two, but we were talking about that. And there's something called the Usenet news group. It's like a news group where it basically is a message board. It's sort of like Reddit. It's like Reddit of the day.
I remember.
Right? So he got on there and he says, check this out, Jim. I got a place for our business. Downtown Toronto, these guys rented the entire floor and they are subletting some space they're not using. So I was like, okay, let's go check it out. We went there. We met this guy who I thought was really old. He was 27. I thought he was super old. I was like, whoa, this is an old guy. He knows what he's doing. And then, and we were like 23, right? 22. And he's like, yeah, we have the space here. what do you guys do? We're like, well, we're 4 engineers and we're going to do this. And his eyes lit up. He's like, we'll give you this space for $500 a month. And, you know, you have the receptionist and the fax machine and the phones, and you guys get all that. And you could just do your work right here. Just put all your equipment here. And I was so excited because I thought 500 split between, you know, 4 guys was super cheap. It's like $100 a guy, $125. And I told my mom, I was like, we're going to start a business. This is what we're going to do. And she's like, you know, typical immigrant parent. She's like, why didn't you ask for 400 a month? I was like, what? I was like, 500 is already cheap. He's like, you could still ask. Nothing's stopping you. And then so I was like, I couldn't argue with that. So the next day they're like,
25% discount. Come on.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. I wasn't thinking that way. I was thinking in terms of money's plentiful. What's the point of negotiating $100? But you know, I know what you mean. So I go there, and the 27-year-old said, so what do you guys think of the offer? I was like, we like the idea of using your facilities and this and that, but how about 400 a month? You have a deal. He didn't even think about it. He's like, yeah, no problem. I was like,
thanks, Mom.
What? I was like, I should have asked for 300. Yeah, that's what I said. I said, thanks, Mom. And then I was like, I should have asked for 300. But anyway, so we're setting up our computers, and he comes into the office looking at us set up, and he was like, listen, in addition to having too much space, we have too much work. So this is the beginning of the internet. Everyone wanted to get on the internet. No one had a website.
Right.
And he's like, our hands are tied with a large Canadian telecommunications company. We have our hands full with that. It's a big project. I've hired, and this guy was super smart. This 27-year-old, he was young, but he was super smart. This guy sold a project to a large Canadian telecommunication company before having employees and before having a space. He was in New York. He came here. He started selling internet services, building whatever people needed. Once they signed an agreement, he took the money and then started hiring and renting space. He took the money first and then he didn't basically rent and then hire people and then started looking for work. He made sure he had the contract, then he hired out. And then so he was like, you know, we're kind of busy with this, and I have this project with a German bank that I can't handle. I don't have enough employees. Do you guys want to do it? I was like, what are you talking about? And then it was like, 10 grand, we need you to do this. And I'm like, wow, look at that. Sales falling from the sky. I was like, okay. And then so that's exactly what happened. His team of salespeople would approach him about, can we handle this project? If he said no, or we need to hire people, we can't do it, they would just throw it to us. We were getting their scraps.
Right.
And so we did that. And I started my first year, I made like 20 grand. You know, it was terrible. But as the internet picked up and all these businesses started flooding the parent company, and he was feeding us, it soon like became 6 digits. Back in the 90s, that's equivalent to like a good sum today. And you know, I was like 25 or something like that. And the business started rolling in, and all these companies, big names too, that you would know, like big banks, huge banks, big companies, insurance companies in the States, like they all came. And because it was such a good deal, we were at 65 cents to the dollar. All these American companies were like, wow, we're getting cheap tech labor. We're getting what we need built. And we did that until basically they merged with us, gave us a ton of stock, like a ton of stock. And then we kept doing that. We went from 4 people, which is me and my 3 buddies, to 400 people in aggregate.
Wow.
So 400 people downtown Toronto working away. I was working night and day. Like, it was too much work. I was sleeping under my desk. We would play video games at night, stay over, keep working. And we did that for over half a decade. And then when the bottom fell out, the tech rally ended, .com crash, all my shares went to zero. And then I decided to go to corporate after a 2-year break.
Got it. You know, and I think
that's wild. That is a ride.
It is a wild ride. And I think, you know, and I think some, you know, our listeners right now are, you know, business owners, entrepreneurs have that same spirit to kind of like, let's get started and where do I go from here? But I mean, like, if, you know, we're thinking about those people who are either started their business or maybe they are still kind of in the corporate space, because that's where you went to, is like, I think a big question that I think you've already solved, and this is what I want to get your opinion on, is that these folks are looking to go, well, what is enough? And like, when do I know I can pivot to being more, passive, and how much is that a right amount? And when do what are the things I need to look for, or prepare for to get there? So for example, you're on record saying I retired at 40, and you're now like the lazy Canadian investor. So like, let's say we're running our business, or let's say I'm still stuck in the corporate world. Like, how much do you feel like is the right amount for us to like get to that space where it's like, I'm now buying my time freedom? Because I think that's what we're all after, right? We're saying, hey, we're working, but really we're working to generate money to have time freedom. And that's really what we buy when we're trying to go into the business space. Like Kyle, you talked about, the four quadrants, and the right side of that quadrant is all about trying to move towards that time freedom in a way. So like, if I'm going to retire, or if I want to move towards retirement, you've done it, so give us your insight on like, what's the right number? Because I know that's hard because everyone's different, but I mean, like, what are the things we should look for? Fill us in, Jim.
That's a fantastic question, John. So the short answer is there's only two ways to do it, and it needs one key piece of information, which is why everything's different, is how much you spend. Right. So it's going to be different for someone who spends $50,000 a year versus a household that spends $100,000 versus a household that spends $150,000. Right. So whatever your household expenses are, right? That's number one. Number two, the only way to do it is if you have a passive cash flow source, either dividends, or in my case, U.S. rental real estate, or you're doing Warren Buffett's sell-off method, where you are liquidating a certain sized portfolio, and that liquidation percentage covers those expenses we just talked about. Right. So those are the only two ways to do it. It's like a cash flow or a sell-off method that Warren Buffett talks about. Now, in terms of cash flow, it's very easy to figure out. If you have passive cash flow in rental real estate of $101,000 and you only spend $100,000, then that is pretty much, B greater than A, you can technically cover all your expenses. The liquidation method is a bit different, and it goes back to that 4% rule, which is only good for 30 years. So the 4% rule says a certain amount of money, if you withdraw 4% in the first year and then withdraw in subsequent years, that amount increased by the inflation rate, you should be able to make that money last for 30 years. So if you are, say, in your 50s or 60s, that would be appropriate for that time frame to take you to like 80 or 90, say, for example. But if you're younger, that rule might not work for you, so you might have to pad that a bit more. So let's say you spend only, I don't know, if you're like my dad, who's like almost 90, he spends less than 40 grand a year. That would be appropriate for him, because $1 million portfolio would be enough for him even back when he was 75 or 80 to take him to 110 or whatever, because the 4% would be 40 more than he spends, and then he would go from there. But if you wanted to go earlier, you probably would have to pad that a bit more. I don't know the exact calculation, but it wouldn't be $1 million. It might be, say, 2 to last for, 40 or 50 years. Right. So for myself, I did the cash flow way, where I saw the opportunity during the U.S. rental crisis to take the revenue that was created from the rentals to cover everything. And then once I did that, and I already had a portfolio of stocks, so I wasn't calculating liquidation value or 4% rule. I was like, I already have the cash flow, so that's covered. So that's how I did it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And I think a piece here, although not said explicitly, but I think, people can pick up on this, is that, these ideas are great starting points, but it really comes down to, your own, I hate saying risk tolerance, because it's not like the traditional risk tolerance. It's more or less like, what's going to help you sleep at night, right? So for you, what I'm hearing is that, you are probably feeling confident. Hey, I've got this stock portfolio. I'm not even going to think about that. It's there. And that might maybe in your head have made you feel like, hey, I've got a little bit of that security blanket over there, you know, if maybe something goes wrong for whatever reason. And then you use the cash flow method from your real estate in the US, which is fantastic. You know, for us, when we were leaving our jobs, it was like we wanted to make sure that we more than doubled our salary so that we could feel that, hey, you know, what if business doesn't go well? Because it was dependent on business. It wasn't dependent on passive income. So really depends on the scenario is what I'm hearing you say. And I think, you know, for us, that makes us feel great because, you know, we're definitely of the same beliefs and we're on that journey to go, okay, how can we find ways that we can get the safety, security that we're after to help us with our sleep at night, but then also be able to, you know, have that time freedom, that cash flow, that access to capital that will allow us to maintain our lifestyle. And then I guess the, you know, again, the other piece that hasn't been specifically mentioned, but I think is really important here is this idea of like, how much are you spending and making sure that, you know, I guess the or the caveat there is like making sure that you don't allow lifestyle inflation to kind of set in, because I'm sure that that can be hard for people to battle as they, you know, maybe see investments growing. And it's like, if you make a plan, you've got to stick to that plan, or if you're going to modify the plan, you've kind of got to go all the way back to the beginning and map it out again. Because if you start veering off that path, you might find yourself 5, 10, 15 years down the road going, that didn't work out so hot. I'm curious, how do you help yourself? You know, how do you maintain sort of your plan? Like, I'm wondering, you're very active on social media. Do you feel that the social media presence you have is helpful to keep you maybe accountable to your own plan? Because my wonder would be for the average individual who, let's say, isn't out there publicly sharing what they're doing, it might be harder for them to sort of stick to the plan that they had. We're humans, right? It's like, I was supposed to go to the gym and then they never go to the gym. How do I stick to this financial plan? Is that why you went to social media, or like, how did you stay on track, and how are you continuing to make sure that you haven't found yourself sort of veering off that original path that you set out for yourself?
That's a fantastic question, Kyle. So that's broken up into two parts. They sound like the same question, but it's actually a component of two answers. Number one, social media was an accident. I didn't want to go on social media. Social media has been around for years, and I only got onto TikTok, and you can tell TikTok is not the oldest platform, right? So TikTok is a new platform. I got there by accident because everything was shut down. I couldn't even go out for dinner. I couldn't even go to the park. Actually, it was like all cordoned off. I couldn't even take my kid to the park.
I remember that.
Yep.
So I'm literally stuck at home, literally, like not even figuratively, like stuck at home, can't go anywhere.
Being lazier than you wanted to be, right? You're like, I can't be this lazy.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So I couldn't go out. And then my daughter put me onto this social media platform. And I never got onto social media again because it seems like too much work. When I see YouTubers, I don't see the content. I see all the editing. I see all the the stuff behind the scenes that has to be done afterwards. Same thing with podcasting. You guys are doing great work here. But for me, I was just like, how am I going to find the guests? How am I going to edit this thing? And, you know, how long is that going to take after post-production and this and that? I don't want to do that. I wasn't a good writer. I hated writing. My grammar was terrible. I did, you know, very poorly in English. I was like, Twitter's not good for me, or writing a blog. I'm not going to do that. But when my daughter showed me TikTok where I could talk like this for 10 seconds, no editing, and just submit it, I was like, that's perfect. That is so lazy. I could just say, like, I wouldn't buy more. I wouldn't pay this much more than for a house. And that's what I would do. 10 seconds, submit, done. And I could bang off a whole bunch of them. And so that's the platform I took, and it took off. And, you know, now we're at like millions of views a month. The second thing I learned from what we talked about when I was in school, back then, I didn't understand how people were not motivated to work, right? I didn't understand that. Then I realized that all success is not based on motivation at all. A lot of actually successful people, when I looked at or listened to them, they never talked about I was motivated or they were using it in a way that didn't really mean that. They said I didn't feel like doing it, but I did it. And that was more in line with discipline. So I never tied what I needed to do with whether or not I felt like doing it. Those were separate ideas. So even if I didn't feel like doing it, if I felt it was necessary, I would do it. So that would be like working out. I don't always feel like I want to work out, but after this podcast, I'm going to go work out because that's where the discipline comes in. And discipline is where success is born from, not motivation. So that is sort of how I sort of combine the two. I was disciplined to get on social media, and social media was an outlet that was lazy enough for me to use and provides a creative outlet for me. I don't have any creative, I don't paint, I don't write, like I told you, I don't like draw, I don't play an instrument. That's my creative outlet. Hopefully that makes some sense.
It does
Totally
make it does make sense. It does make sense. And I think we all kind of gravitate towards, whether we want, where do we want to dedicate our time? Where do we want to make sure that we're, following through on the important things? So, Jim, as we kind of wrap up here, I want to ask you kind of like one final question we try to ask all of our guests on our podcast is about your wealth secret sauce. So, our listeners are trying to build their wealth. They're trying to kind of get that time freedom. They're trying to, minimize some of their tax strategies and retain more, more money of that they earn. They're earning through business or through their T4 jobs. But where would you say is, a secret sauce tip that you could leave, a business owner, an entrepreneur who is on this wealth building journey?
That's a really good question. So I'm more of an investor than a entrepreneur, although this latest endeavor with social media has made me more of I started another company around this one. But I always looked at it in terms of like, literally, like, is this worth my time? Like, am I going to be compensated for this? How will this, if I kept doing this 10 years from now, where am I likely to end up? So I learned a lot from entrepreneurs by watching them. For example, like the young fellow who sold things before paying for things, money in before money out. I also learned Warren Buffett's method. He was like, you don't need to run the business. If you can find the business that's being run well, you can just piggyback off those thousands of people who are working really hard. So I was always like, the least effort for the most impact and increasing time freedom. You only increase time freedom if you do it that way, because you can work really hard, but if you're only getting a one-to-one leverage, you're just going to be working, harder and harder and harder just to increase that the numerical one-to-one leverage, right? So, for example, it's like writing a book. Most people write a book by doing all the upfront work, research, footnotes, spending 2 years writing it, then they try and sell it, and no one buys it. You don't want to do it that way because you're loading up all the work and you don't even know at the end. So what you do is, and again, when you listen to people who've done really well self-publishing, they do it the same way like this business owner does. I create content on social media. I engage my audience with what I want to write. I ask them for suggestions and ideas that they want to see. Then I write what they want, keep them updated, and then I put a pre-order form. And if they buy it, I will write it. If they don't buy it, I'm not writing anything. So that's exactly how it is when it's investing or business. You want to know that your effort will translate into more than a one-to-one proportional push, right?
I love it.
Right.
Revenue first, expenses second.
That is an awesome secret sauce piece here. I've gained so many ideas. First of all, I want to say we had so many more questions. So I have a funny feeling we're going to be tapping you on the shoulder at some point in the future to dig a little deeper. But my big takeaways that I'm getting here from this conversation, one is around discipline. And I think that's really important. Like, and you're using, and what I'm kind of learning from this is sort of your definition of lazy really is about figuring out what do you want to do with your time? Because I'm going to be honest and say most people would look at your social media and say, this guy isn't lazy, like, look at all this stuff he's doing. But the caveat though, is it sounds like you enjoy doing it and you've analyzed that and you've looked and said, hey, if I put this much effort into it, what am I going to get out of it? And is that something that I actually want to do? And I really appreciate that by the work that you do. I've been on your email list as well. We'll have some links for everyone to go learn more about you, see you on social media. And ultimately, what I found is that the part I also think is important is that it's not a one-trick pony for you. You know, so what I mean by that is you're not out there telling everyone you've got to do this strategy in order to become successful. It really comes down to people having to kind of think about it. Who are you? What is it that you're looking for? Are you more conservative? And like, do you need to have something that feels more like maybe a base case pension? We help people with that sometimes, right? Where, you know, dare I say it, we use a permanent whole life insurance policy to take care of this basic need that they have so that they can sleep better at night, and then leverage that to go do some great things. Maybe it's, you know, buy real estate like we do, or do some of these other things. So I really appreciate that about you, that you don't push sort of an agenda as to what it is that people need to invest in or how they need to act, but you are giving them some amazing tips on how they can take greater control of their life, which really means taking control of their time and deciding what they want to spend our very limited time here on this planet doing. So we so appreciate you for that. It's been an amazing conversation. I hope that we can, you know, continue to get to know each other in the future. But before we wrap it up, tell people where can they find you on social media and maybe on this thing called the internet.
Awesome. Thank you, Kyle. So you can find me on TikTok. My handle is at Jim, Jim, last name Chuong, one word. And Instagram, you can find me. You don't need the @ you just go to instagram.com/Jim Chuong, one word. And I'm actually, the latest platform I'm trying is X, which I find is easier to do. Again, same handle, at Jim Chuong. It's easier to do when I'm working out because, you know, I'm breathing heavy and videos don't translate very well.
Right. Awesome. Awesome stuff there, Jim. We'll put that in our show notes page. And once again, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you real soon.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Thanks, guys.